Okay, great. All right. Well, hello. So I'll preface this also with I've always taught graduate students in 2.5-hour lectures. So this kind of smaller group discussion is different for me. And I realized later that some of my references, you might be too young, but it's okay. I'll give you context if not. But so I want to talk about gender communication and negotiation skills. So eventually you'll be looking for a job. And when you get into the field, I'm sure that there is some bias and discrimination you're experiencing now. Obviously, it's everywhere. But the further you advance in your field, the more you're going to come into contact with this and the more barriers you're going to see. And the more, I will say that being in academia the last couple of years, I have become more and more militant, may not be the right word, but very aware of what women face differently than men in progressing through a very sort of patriarchal institution like academia, and you're going to find that in your fields as well. So while some of this may not seem as relevant to you now, it's going to be really important. And nobody told me this. No one, I had male mentors, and I think it's really great and important to identify female mentors now because I was unprepared. And so a lot of things kind of took me by surprise. And I think with gaining the skills and the awareness, you're going to go into the field armed with so much more power. And it's going to make a huge difference. So that's what we're hoping for you. And that's what I'm hoping to kind of get through to all of you in talking about some of these negotiation skills. So there is a gender gap in wages. Were you able to read any of the resources?
Yeah.
Okay, so you read they were brief articles, and did you watch the TED Talk? Yeah. So have you all seen anything with Sheryl Sandberg before or read Lean In? That's okay. Yeah.
I actually plan on reading it.
I highly recommend it. I mean, there are some things that you have to take with a little bit of a grain of salt. You know, I can't afford a nanny, whatever. Like some solutions are more difficult for some women than others, but there are incredibly useful, small, practical pieces of advice she gives. When she talks about sitting at the table, pay attention. You know, pay attention when you're going to conferences and meetings and looking at who sits at the table. And I make a point always of, and I tend to be pathologically early, but when I go somewhere, I will take a seat at the table, and I'm not going to sit around the edges. I'm going to be there and participate, and I think that makes a big difference in how people value you, because it's showing how you value yourself and your contribution. I really like that piece of advice that she talks about. And there are a few other things about body language that are good in the Lean In book, and a lot of other strategies, what you look for and ask for in mentors. But as women, we have to be very proactive. We have to be really proactive and vigilant about gaining that power for ourselves, because no one's giving it to us. It's not being handed over. Okay, so there is a gender gap in wages, as you may have seen. So in 1955, the mean, I should probably look this way towards this, but annual wages of women were 60% that of men. And in 2009, so white women were making 77%, 77 cents on the dollar of white men. It's even worse. Oh, this is going out of order. Well, so that goes down to 54 cents on the dollar for Hispanic women, 63 cents on the dollar for black women, 62 for Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, 59 for American Indian, Alaskan Native. So we're seeing this differential not just by gender, but then also by race. So progress, kind of, but not really. There's a little bit of progress, but we have so far to go. This also shows the earnings ratio by race ethnicity. So even when you look within, so this is within race and ethnicity, what women are making compared to men. And then this is when you compare to white men's earnings. So there's a huge, huge disparity. So why is there a wage differential? So women do tend to cluster more in lower paying jobs, but that's not what we're doing, right? So as women in STEM, we are moving into jobs that are more male dominated. But this does talk about why there's that kind of national wage gap. But even within higher paying occupations, women tend to cluster in lower paying areas. So when you're talking about medicine, general practitioners versus surgeons. In academia, there are fewer full professors that are women than men. And part of the reason is a subtle form, and sometimes not so subtle form of discrimination, brought about by barriers to entry for higher paying occupations as well. So even in the high paying STEM jobs like we're talking about, 82% of women in engineering, were making 82 cents on the dollar for men, and in computing, 87 cents on the dollar. So in STEM, we're doing better than women nationally, but there's still a disparity. Is it legal? Well, no. It's not supposed to be, but it happens. And this is one resource I just wanted to direct you to. It's on the American Association of University Women, but they have a fair pay policy advocacy, so you can kind of join in some of their advocacy for helping solve this wage issue. So men and women in the same organization doing equal work must be paid equally. Same skill, effort, responsibility, and working conditions. But this doesn't always happen. If pay differences are the result of differences in this seniority, then it's legally allowable. So our gender roles are creating discrepancies about what is the worth of women in the marketplace. Skills, so men tend to have more human capital, so they befriend people, they make connections within their network to people who have more power and more resources, and then they access that more so than women do. Women, we like to access our networks for social support and that kind of thing, rather than for sort of leveraging resources for power and advancement. So we use our networks differently. Effort, men work longer hours in their market job. So not to say when women are going home or doing other things that they're not. And there's greater seniority, uninterrupted careers. So you're getting more experience and getting promoted more because your career may not be as interrupted as it might be for women who choose to have children in particular. And then working conditions. So men are more willing to take on sort of dangerous tasks that end up being higher paid jobs a lot of the time. They'll commute further too. So a lot of gender wage gap is because of some of these pressures of, women are interested, if you're interested in having a family, there's a time commitment and a commitment that then often detracts from our career. And then we make different choices in jobs because of that. And so that can impact our earnings ability because we're not progressing the same as men are. But even when we compare women and men in apples to apples comparisons, women's wages are still lower. So here's and I want to point out too that a lot of this information I have borrowed from Joe LaBianca. So he is in the Gatton College of Business and Management, and one of his areas of expertise is on negotiation. So they did a study looking at the wage gap here at Kentucky, and the dependent variable was salary, and then they controlled for all of these other pieces. So how long have you been here, the department, your contract, anything that might really impact your earnings, and still found that the average female faculty salary was lower than the average male salary, and lower than the average faculty salary. And this is a few years old, but it still points out that even when controlling for all these other factors, and there have been some colleges and some attempts to even that out. I know in my college, the College of Public Health, they did in the last 2 years a redistribution of salary to try to bring some equity, but we still are one of the lowest paid colleges on campus. So what about negotiation? So women and men from the same MBA program with same grades and majors going to the same entry-level position negotiate for different amounts. So what's up with that? And women are receiving 102.7% of their initial asking offer, men 104.5%. So men are getting more. We don't negotiate as hard as men on average. But what's very important is that your starting salary is going to determine your earnings for the rest of your life. It's hard to change it after you've just begun. So, and this is something I didn't know at all. I tried to negotiate when I started. I can get into my experience with trying to negotiate my position here. I had really poor advice. I didn't know what I was doing, and I got shrifted pretty bad. And I am still recovering from that. And it wasn't only in salary, but also in what I had to do, is teaching load and other responsibilities. So it's not always about salary. There are other things you can negotiate for. But it put me on such a difficult path that now I've been here 3.5 years, and I'm only just now starting to be able to really do my job, what I'm supposed to be doing. So this is really important. What you start off with is going to have a major impact on the rest of your career. So as long as you even hear that right now, like I had no idea that this was the case. So men initiate negotiations more often. Women hate it. And that's true for me. I don't like to negotiate. I don't like conflict all that much. Men think it's fun, you know. To them, it's like winning a ball game versus women saying it's like going to the dentist. We're pessimistic. We ask for less. And a large proportion of us, or a small proportion, 20% still, never negotiate. Just never even do it. So what makes up good negotiators? Rational, assertiveness, self-assured, okay, and these are traditionally considered masculine traits. What makes a bad negotiator? Emotionality, being accommodating, right? And these are typically more feminine traits. So should we just man up? Is that what we're supposed to do? Hi, come on in. So what happens when women try to employ traditionally male tactics? Do you guys remember from what you read? Did it say anything?
To be disliked more often than if men display the same emotion, like the same characteristics, I guess. They tend to be admired and women are disliked.
Exactly. So the same characteristics that people admire in men, they dislike in women. Were you going to add?
I was going to say we seem selfish.
Yeah. So if we ask for something, we're told we're selfish. But if men ask for something, it's totally expected. You can sit here if you'd like.
Sure.
Yeah, whatever. Or is that in the way, Randolph? I'll let you.
I'm
So, okay. Right. So we get called. She can scoot in. You can scoot in. More. She wants to scoot this way more. Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Kate Eddens. Hello. Very nice to meet you. Welcome. Okay. So yeah, we still lose. We are in a lose-lose situation. So if we act more masculine and do these things, people are like, oh, well, we don't want you to be like that. But if we embody these more feminine characteristics, we're not getting what we need. So, right, so we could call demanding, unfeminine, unseemly, shrewish, macho. Okay, we don't want this, right? Do you remember, I don't remember if it was Sheryl Sandberg, what did she say we could do? Do you remember from any of the articles?
This is when she was talking about like sit at the table.
Yeah, so doing those, and in negotiation strategies,
she said flirting would get us what we wanted.
Right, okay, so flirting, being more feminine. So be more feminine, that's what people want us to do. Should we be more feminine? This is like I said, I'm very like, slides. I have 1,000 different slides all the time. Always smile. Be communal. Relentlessly pleasant. I love that because it's almost aggressive. Be relentlessly pleasant. Don't take a critical stance. Can you think of anyone who maybe prominent women right now who have to embody these characteristics? Like, this is...
Women in politics?
Yes.
They want voters.
Right, yeah, so who is smiling all the time? I always like, okay, so she said be appropriately female, and I'm like, smile. If you watch Hillary Clinton, she gets asked questions like, if you're the president and Bill Clinton is the first man, who's gonna pick out the China patterns? And you know what she does? She smiles. She smiles even though she is being asked an idiotic question because she is a woman. And she smiles. 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 And then she's like, I am so tired of smiling. But she is doing it, right? Because it's what you have to do. You're being held to a double standard. But you know what? There's part of this where we have to play the game. Because society hasn't changed yet. It hasn't changed. So we have to walk that line between being called powerful and assertive and being called the B word, right? So smiling, being relentlessly pleasant while you are demanding for what you need and want is one tactic to get there. I also put in, when she was talking about flirting, so this is where I'm worried that you guys might be too young to remember Sarah Palin and the 2008 elections. So she was much more feminine, and she did this winking thing, and she would blow kisses, which you don't see Hillary Clinton doing. And so, Hillary Clinton gets called all of these names. And Sarah Palin, she had her other issues. But the media crucified her just as much as they're doing, women on very different political ends of the spectrum, but because she was almost too feminist. So she was acceptable. Men really liked her because she was pretty, and she'd been in pageants, and she would do these flirtation things. But she's still. You can't have it either way. Either way, the women are getting crucified. So. What do we do? This was a quote from one of the articles. So when it comes to playing hardball, we're damned if we do and damned if we don't. It's galling to think we had to employ a Mad Men era strategy of flirtation to get a fair shake. But if you ease back, don't think of necessarily flirtation, but that pleasantness, then that is one small strategy that plays into a bigger role. However, what I want to talk to you a little bit more about today is, I'm going to keep my eye on the time, if we can develop strategies in negotiation, then this gender bias becomes slightly less important. Because if we can go in with the skills that help overcome those characteristics that may make women less good at negotiating, then we don't have to worry about it, okay? So negotiating performance equals your ability times your motivation, plus or minus some external conditions. All right, so how would you know if negotiating was successful? You want to raise. Why? You need to know why do you want it. Is it because you don't feel as valued as other people? Or is it because suddenly you need to send your kid to college, I know this is further down the line, or you need to afford your apartment or whatever it is, and so you need more money. One of these is a better reason to ask for a raise than the other. Unless you know the real reasons for entering the negotiation, you aren't going to get a good performance. So be honest with yourself. So you have to develop alternatives that you're willing to exercise if negotiation doesn't go well. So men are more willing to switch jobs to obtain their market value than women are. Don't devalue wages. I'm going to bring all this down so I can see everything. So it's good to take a broad view of your interests, but don't assume. So wages are very important because of what I was saying earlier about where your starting salary is going to determine what you make for the rest of your life. But there are also other components like bonuses and vacation time and things like that that play into it. But don't trade those for salary as much as you can. Okay. So giving up on these wages is going to have a cumulative effect over your career. It's hard to make up those differences. Try to get it all first. So, okay, but don't get hung up entirely on it. Don't focus exclusively on wages to the detriment of other issues that might provide more value for you. So don't necessarily make a quick deal, take your time when negotiating. This is going to be important because you want the best deal you can get, not the fastest deal. And if the other party says no, ask them why and listen very carefully to what they are saying about why they won't allow you to have what you're asking for. Understand their underlying interests, not just their position, and then explain your underlying interests. Because oftentimes you can seek creative solutions that are going to be helpful to everyone in the end. All right, so ability. There are a lot of tips for improving your ability. First and foremost, and this is what is very difficult often for women, believe in the value of what you are selling. It's you. It's your skills. It's what you are bringing to the table. And that's really important. And we have a really hard time as women saying like, yes, I am worth all of this. And have you talked about the imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I definitely think that the wage gap corresponds directly with the confidence gap.
Yep,
For sure.
It absolutely does. Because men just assume, speaking in generalizing statements, but men just assume that they are absolutely worth all of this money. And women are like, oh, am I? I mean, I'm not as good as this other person, but I'm better than this person. So, am I going to live up to it? All of those things that fall into the imposter syndrome and that confidence gap play a huge role in this main piece, which is understanding your value. We're also really good at negotiating for other people because we take care of other people first, right? And that is a very natural instinct that happens. And so we tend to consider the well-being of others before ourselves. So we just don't put enough value on ourselves. Okay, don't dwell on negative aspects, focus on the positive, and you need to believe in yourself enough to sell the other people on you. You also need data. So you can't negotiate effectively without it, and don't fall into the homophily trap. So what this means is don't ask just other women what they think you should be making. Ask men too, right? Because they have this different perspective. Ask men. Go online. Look up and see, what are other people in your field making? How do they differ than you? What's the average in your field? So what should you be asking for? Don't just ask the people with whom you're most comfortable. So when we talk about homophily in networks, the people who are most like you are the people you're most comfortable with, but they also have access to really similar information and resources and people as you. So you have to go to people who are different than you to get access to new information and new resources. So check in with those people who are different than you. Winning tactics. So the first thing you have to do when you're going into negotiation is understand what is your best alternative to negotiating this agreement or your BATNA. So what's going to happen if you don't get this job? What's going to happen if you don't get this offer? You have to have some kind of alternative and be willing to take that alternative. What is your reservation point? So your reservation point is going to be the lowest possible offer that you're going to take, okay? What is your, I will do it, but if it's any less than this, I'm walking away. Above or below which will exercise that alternative. So what is your target point? Now this is what you want. This is, and within reason, okay? So having done the research and understanding what you should get, what's your target point? Obviously it shouldn't be the same as your reservation point. Be optimistic, shoot high. All right, so here's an example of where the buyer has their reservation point and their, well, for a buyer, it would be, this would be the reservation point, and this is their, what they really want. And for the seller, they want to sell it here, but they're willing to go here. And what you have right here is your negotiation area. Right? So your goal is to claim as much of the value in that bargaining zone or the shaded area as is possible. That's your bargaining zone. So try to get the other party's reservation price. You want to figure out what their lowest possible price is so that you can get that. And this is hard because people aren't willing to necessarily let go of that information. And then you open aggressively with the highest defensible offer. So most negotiations end at the midpoint of this bargaining zone, okay? On things such as salary. So when you're giving concessions on that point, you try to get concessions that are more valuable on other issues. So if you end up at the midpoint on your salary bargaining, then you need to talk about vacation time, travel expenses, research resources, bonuses. I can tell you, like for an example in mine, I got nothing, like almost nothing in negotiation on wages. I got almost nothing that I negotiated for on getting out of having to develop new classes in the first year. I got out of teaching for 1 semester, that was it. Research resources, I got a decent amount of money for start beginning my research, so that was good. I asked for a specific computer and specific software programs, and that was good. But they're in some travel, so they paid for my moving up to a certain extent. But that wasn't ideal. But in my situation, my BAFTA was something that my husband was not really supportive of. So we would have had to go to another city, only have been there for a couple years and for a lower salary. So there was sort of this point at which I had to take an offer or walk away to not my BAFTA, my BANTA. Is that what it was? Yeah. What's BAFTA? That's like the free trade. Anyway, or something, something else entirely. Anyway, so all of these can play a role. Employ a funnel pattern. So don't go, okay, 140, all right, no, how about 138? Okay, and you're going down equally at each time, 134,000, you're going down 2,000 each time. Use this funnel mechanism. So you start slowing down and not going down as much. You start at 140, 138, then 137, then 136.5. So you're trying to narrow down that negotiation point. So that's more likely to lead to a final agreement. So you can take, if you believe your employer is discriminating, you can take it to an enforcement agency and get a good employment lawyer. Approximately 5% of the gender gap is due to discrimination based on some research, so that may still exist. But if there are institutional impediments, you need to work together to reduce those. But you have to be aware of that, and that takes a lot of research too, of looking into the place that you're going to be and understanding what some of those. I didn't look and say, what are men who are junior faculty making compared to women? I looked at the person who was nearest to me, the person who was closest in rank, and that was one thing, was that the amount I had asked for was going to be what she was making, and she'd been there for several years. So they wouldn't go above a certain point because they would have had to boost her salary. But you know what would have been great? if I could have pushed to boost her salary and got mine, right? But I didn't know how to do that. So because your future relationship with this person or organization is important, you cannot take a scorched earth strategy. So you can't just demand, and you have to be aware of how you're doing the negotiation, because if you want a relationship with this organization or person, you can't burn those bridges. But you still have to ask for what you need. Okay. But the more that you practice these skills and develop those, then the better off you're going to be going into it, and remembering that this first negotiation is going to set things for the rest of your life. So, no pressure. No pressure at all. Okay. Well, thank you. And if you have any questions for me, please feel free to contact me. If you want to do some skill building and negotiation, you can contact Joe LaBianca in the Gatton School. I can give you his information because he does workshops. And also, I think on the AAUW website, or in one of those articles, was a link to a program that helps women develop negotiating skills. So it was great to meet you all. Nice meeting you. Thank you.